Have you ever wondered why some people seem completely immune to criticism, rejection, and failure? While others crumble at the first sign of difficulty, these individuals stand firm like mountains in a storm. They possess something that most people desperately seek but never find: an unbreakable mind. What if I told you that Friedrich Nietzsche discovered the secret to this psychological invulnerability over a century ago? What if the very thing that makes you vulnerable, your need for external validation, your fear of being disliked, your desperate attempts to fit in, is actually the key to your transformation? Today, we're going to explore Nietzsche's most radical insight: that true mental strength doesn't come from avoiding pain or seeking comfort. It comes from something far more dangerous and transformative. It comes from embracing what he called the eternal return, the willingness to live your life in such a way that you could bear repeating it infinitely. But here's the catch. This journey requires you to abandon everything you've been taught about happiness, success, and what it means to be strong. It requires you to face a truth so uncomfortable that most people spend their entire lives running from it. You are not meant to be comfortable. You are meant to be powerful. This video isn't for those seeking easy answers or quick fixes. It's for you who have felt the weight of existence, who have questioned everything, who are ready to stop being a victim of circumstance and become the architect of your own psychological destiny. Are you ready to discover the secret that will make your mind absolutely unbreakable? Let's dive into the abyss that Nietzsche mapped for us, because it's only by going through hell that you emerge as something divine. The illusion of external strength. Before we can build an unbreakable mind, we must first destroy the false foundations you've been building your identity upon. Nietzsche understood that most people's mental strength is actually elaborate weakness disguised as resilience. You think you're strong because you can endure stress, push through difficulties, or maintain a positive attitude. But this isn't strength, it's performance. Real strength begins with a brutal recognition. Everything you've been taught about mental toughness is designed to keep you dependent on external circumstances. You've been conditioned to measure your worth by others' opinions, to seek validation through achievement, to find meaning in systems created by others. This isn't mental fortitude, it's psychological slavery. Nietzsche called this the slave morality, a value system that keeps you perpetually seeking approval from masters who don't even know they're controlling you. Every time you modify your behavior to be liked, every time you silence your authentic thoughts to avoid conflict, every time you choose comfort over truth, you're strengthening the chains that bind your mind. The secret to an unbreakable mind starts with recognizing that your current strength is actually your greatest weakness. You're not mentally tough, you're mentally compliant. You've learned to endure suffering not because you're strong, but because you're afraid of what would happen if you stopped enduring it. True mental strength requires something most people find terrifying: the willingness to be completely responsible for your own psychological state. This means no more blaming circumstances, no more seeking validation from others, no more waiting for external conditions to improve before you can feel powerful. It means recognizing that your mind is your domain, and you are its absolute ruler. But here's where it gets dangerous. When you truly take responsibility for your mental state, you realize that most of your suffering is self-created. The criticism that devastates you only has power because you've given it power. The rejection that destroys you only matters because you've decided it matters. This recognition is simultaneously liberating and terrifying because it means you have no one to blame but yourself. The abyss of self-confrontation. Nietzsche wrote, "When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." This isn't poetry, it's a psychological instruction manual. The abyss he's referring to is the darkness within yourself, your fears, your weaknesses, your contradictions, your capacity for both greatness and destruction. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this abyss. They fill their time with distractions, surround themselves with people who reflect back a comfortable image, and construct elaborate stories about why they are the way they are. But an unbreakable mind requires you to do the opposite. You must stare directly into your own darkness until you're no longer afraid of what you see. This confrontation with your own abyss is where most people fail. They get a glimpse of their own psychological terrain, the pettiness, the fear, the desperate need for approval, and they immediately retreat. They go back to their comfortable illusions, their self-help books, their positive affirmations. But these are just sophisticated forms of self-deception. The secret that Nietzsche discovered is this: your greatest strength lies hidden within your greatest weakness. The very qualities you most despise about yourself, the parts you're most ashamed of, the aspects of your personality you try hardest to hide. These contain the raw material for your transformation. But accessing this power requires something that goes against every instinct you have. You must learn to love your own darkness. Not in a narcissistic way, but in the way a sculptor loves the raw stone before it becomes a masterpiece. You must see your flaws not as things to be eliminated, but as untapped potential waiting to be transformed. This is what Nietzsche meant by amor fati, love of fate. You must learn to love not just the pleasant aspects of your existence, but the entire package. Your mistakes, your failures, your humiliations, your moments of weakness. Because it's precisely these experiences that contain the seeds of your invulnerability. When you can look at your worst moments and say, "I wouldn't change a thing because this is what made me who I am," you've achieved something that most people never will: complete psychological sovereignty. You're no longer at the mercy of external circumstances because you've made peace with your internal landscape. The death of the false self. Here's where Nietzsche's philosophy becomes truly radical. Building an unbreakable mind requires the complete destruction of who you think you are. The personality you've constructed, the image you've cultivated, the roles you play. All of this must die for your authentic self to be born. This process is what Nietzsche called self-overcoming. It's not about becoming a better version of yourself. It's about becoming so fundamentally different that your previous self seems like a stranger. This requires a kind of psychological courage that most people don't possess, because it means voluntarily entering a state of complete uncertainty about who you are. The false self you've been protecting is built on external validation. It needs constant reinforcement from others to feel real. It's fragile because it's constructed from borrowed values, inherited beliefs, and social expectations. When this false self is threatened, you experience anxiety, depression, and a profound sense of meaninglessness. But the authentic self that emerges from this death process is fundamentally different. It doesn't need external validation because it generates its own values. It's not threatened by criticism because it doesn't depend on others' opinions for its existence. It's unbreakable because it's built on truth rather than illusion. This transformation process is brutal because it requires you to abandon everything that has given your life meaning up to this point. Your career achievements, your relationships, your possessions. All of these external markers of success become irrelevant when you're building an unbreakable mind. What matters is not what you have, but who you are when everything is stripped away. Nietzsche understood that most people would rather live in comfortable self-deception than face this kind of radical transformation. They'll choose familiar suffering over unfamiliar freedom. They'll cling to their false self, even when it's destroying them, because at least it's predictable. But for those who have the courage to undergo this death and rebirth process, something extraordinary emerges. A mind that cannot be broken because it's no longer attached to anything breakable. You become psychologically invulnerable, not because nothing can hurt you, but because you've stopped identifying with the parts of yourself that can be hurt. The will to power as self-mastery. Now, we come to the heart of Nietzsche's secret, the will to power. This is perhaps his most misunderstood concept, often interpreted as a desire to dominate others. But the true will to power is something far more sophisticated and dangerous. It's the drive to master yourself completely. The will to power is not about controlling external circumstances. It's about becoming so internally powerful that external circumstances become irrelevant. It's the recognition that the only real power is self-power, and the only meaningful victory is victory over your own limitations. This self-mastery manifests in several ways. First, you develop the ability to choose your emotional states, rather than being chosen by them. Instead of being happy when things go well and sad when things go badly, you maintain psychological equilibrium, regardless of external conditions. Your emotional state becomes independent of circumstances. Second, you develop the capacity to create your own values, rather than inheriting them from others. Instead of living according to society's definitions of success, morality, and meaning, you develop your own ethical framework based on your direct experience of reality. You become your own authority. Third, you develop the strength to endure uncertainty without needing to create false certainties. Most people cannot tolerate not knowing what their life means, where they're going, or what the future holds. They create elaborate belief systems to provide the illusion of certainty. But true power comes from being comfortable with the fundamental uncertainty of existence. This process of self-mastery is what creates an unbreakable mind. When you're no longer dependent on external validation, when you're generating your own values, when you're comfortable with uncertainty, what could possibly break you? Criticism becomes irrelevant because you're not seeking approval. Failure becomes instructive because you're not attached to specific outcomes. Loss becomes acceptable because you're not clinging to anything. But here's the paradox. The more self-contained you become, the more powerful your impact on the world. When you're not desperately seeking others' approval, they're drawn to your independence. When you're not afraid of being disliked, people respect your authenticity. When you're not trying to control circumstances, you often influence them more effectively. The eternal return test. Nietzsche's ultimate test for an unbreakable mind is the eternal return. If you had to live your exact life over again, infinitely, would you choose to do so? This isn't just a thought experiment. It's a psychological litmus test that reveals whether you've truly transcended your circumstances or are still enslaved by them. Most people would fail this test immediately. They would desperately want to change their past mistakes, avoid their failures, skip their painful experiences. This reaction reveals that they're still psychologically dependent on having things be different than they are. They haven't achieved true acceptance of their existence. But someone with an unbreakable mind would pass this test because they've learned to see their entire life, including all the pain, failure, and humiliation, as necessary for their development. They understand that their strength was forged in the fire of their difficulties, and they wouldn't trade that strength for an easier path. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting mistreatment. It means developing such complete ownership of your experience that you can honestly say you wouldn't change anything about your past because it created who you are today. This level of self-acceptance creates a psychological fortress that nothing can penetrate. The eternal return also serves as a guide for future decisions. Before making any choice, ask yourself, if I had to live with the consequences of this decision forever, would I still make it? This filter eliminates decisions made from fear, desperation, or the need for external validation. It ensures that your choices align with your deepest values and authentic self. When you can live as if you're choosing every moment of your existence for eternity, you've achieved something remarkable: complete responsibility for your psychological state. You're no longer a victim of circumstances because you've chosen your circumstances. You're no longer at the mercy of others because you've chosen your responses to others. This is the secret to an unbreakable mind, not the elimination of suffering, but the transformation of suffering into strength. Not the avoidance of difficulty, but the embrace of difficulty as the raw material for growth. Not the pursuit of happiness, but the creation of meaning that transcends happiness and unhappiness. The loneliness of authentic power. Here's a truth that no one talks about. Developing an unbreakable mind will make you lonely. Not because you'll isolate yourself, but because you'll no longer be able to relate to the psychological games that most people play. You'll watch others desperately seeking validation, avoiding responsibility, and living in self-deception, and you'll feel a profound sense of separation. Nietzsche experienced this loneliness deeply. He wrote for an audience that didn't yet exist, knowing that his ideas would be misunderstood by his contemporaries. He understood that authentic power comes with the price of psychological isolation, because you can no longer participate in the comfortable illusions that bind society together. This loneliness is not a bug in the system, it's a feature. It's proof that you've transcended the herd mentality and achieved genuine individuality. Most people avoid this loneliness at all costs, choosing to remain psychologically dependent rather than face the isolation that comes with true strength. But this loneliness also contains a hidden gift. It forces you to develop a relationship with yourself that's deeper than any external relationship could ever be. When you can no longer depend on others for validation, entertainment, or meaning, you discover inner resources you never knew existed. You learn to enjoy your own company not as a consolation prize, but as the greatest privilege available to conscious beings. You develop the capacity to be fully present with yourself without needing distractions, stimulation, or external input. This self-relationship becomes the foundation of your unbreakable mind. Moreover, this authentic solitude attracts others who have also done the work of self-development. You begin to connect with people on a level that transcends the superficial social games that characterize most human interaction. These connections are rare but profound because they're based on authenticity rather than mutual neediness. The loneliness of authentic power is temporary. It's the space between leaving the false community of the herd and finding the genuine community of other individuals who have achieved self-mastery. But during this transition period, you must be strong enough to stand alone, living beyond good and evil. The final secret to an unbreakable mind is learning to live beyond conventional morality, what Nietzsche called beyond good and evil. This doesn't mean becoming amoral or destructive. It means developing your own ethical framework based on your direct experience of reality rather than inherited moral rules. Most people's minds are breakable because they're constantly judging themselves and others according to external moral standards. They feel guilty when they violate social expectations, even when those expectations are arbitrary or harmful. They feel righteous when they conform to social norms, even when that conformity requires self-betrayal. An unbreakable mind operates from a different place, authentic values that emerge from your own psychological development rather than social conditioning. You develop the capacity to distinguish between what's genuinely helpful for growth and what's merely socially acceptable. This doesn't make you a moral relativist who believes that anything goes. Instead, it makes you morally autonomous, someone who takes full responsibility for developing and living according to their own ethical principles. You become guided by wisdom rather than rules, by understanding rather than obedience. This moral autonomy is essential for psychological invulnerability because it means you're no longer at the mercy of others' moral judgments. When someone criticizes your choices, you can evaluate their criticism based on your own understanding rather than automatically accepting or rejecting it based on social pressure. You develop the confidence to make decisions that others might not understand or approve of, as long as those decisions align with your authentic values. This freedom from moral conformity is one of the most powerful aspects of an unbreakable mind because it allows you to act from integrity rather than fear. The transformation. So here's the secret that Nietzsche discovered. An unbreakable mind isn't built through positive thinking, motivation, or willpower. It's built through radical self-acceptance, authentic self-expression, and the courage to live according to your own values rather than others' expectations. The journey requires you to face your darkest fears, abandon your false self, embrace uncertainty, and accept the loneliness that comes with authentic power. It requires you to love your fate completely, including all the pain and failure that shaped you. It requires you to create your own morality rather than inheriting it from others. But the reward is extraordinary. A mind that cannot be broken because it's no longer attached to anything breakable. A psychological fortress built not from denial or delusion, but from complete acceptance and authentic self-expression. This is your invitation to begin this transformation. Stop seeking external validation and start developing internal authority. Stop avoiding your darkness and start embracing it as raw material for growth. Stop living according to others' values and start creating your own. If this message resonates with you, if you're ready to begin building an unbreakable mind, share your commitment in the comments. Write, "I choose authentic power over comfortable weakness." Let's build a community of individuals who refuse to remain psychologically dependent. The world doesn't need more people seeking happiness. It needs more people creating meaning. It needs more individuals who have transcended the need for external validation and developed the courage to live authentically. Your unbreakable mind is waiting. The only question is, do you have the courage to claim it?